Sometimes an attack does not feel like an attack, more like a cloud, or just gravity pulling you down. Slow enough, and you do not feel it at all. It just feels unfair and endless. It's only later, when you can fast forward through the years, that you see how merciless and unrelenting the barrage of disinformation is, fueled by fear. Nothing good will come of that. This is not the start of my story. This is just for context. A framing device. I am a very willing but rather lazy activist. I pop online from time to time to take the temperature. Yesterday, the Twitter was sharing Michelle Telfer's submission to the Senate. I don't know if anyone saw it. Yes, exactly. They have an inquiry on media diversity, and in her submission she lists with excruciating clarity the 45 headlines in 12 months from that national disgrace of a paper, who quite fortunately either gave up or got distracted. It's quite hard to continue a barrage like that when there is actually some serious news. They've tried, though. They do their bit. Telfer is the head of the Royal Children's Hospital gender clinic in Melbourne. But really this is about trans kids. It's always about trans kids. I was once a trans kid. I imagine many of you were too. So that seems like a good place to start. My name is T, and this is my trans story. Sitting comfortably? Good. Well then, there was once a little person, human, called... They were about 3 or 4 years old when they suddenly realised that they were different. Can't really start like that. It's a trick, it's a trope. The trans existence is rich and complex, and never before have we really been able to bring together the kind of people to give us an idea of quite how rich, quite how diverse, quite how extraordinary. It's been just a total pleasure. Thank you all. Especially the skipping, quite unexpected. Our stories aren't the same. The same thing we have, actually, if anything, is the shared language of pain and suffering. I sometimes think that the only thing we have in common is our struggle, both with society and with our bodies. But as it goes, when I was 3 or 4, I knew. I just didn't know what it was that I knew. Back then, all I knew was that I was different. And in 1970s Kent, whatever it was not cool. I don't remember developing a strategy. I wasn't thrown out on the street. I just clearly decided not to know as fast and as sincerely as possible. The one thing that I did know that I never managed to fully erase was that there had to have been, or that there surely had to be a switchover day. A day when all the little boys became little girls, and vice versa. I trusted in switchover day more than I trusted Santa or the Tooth Fairy. I believed it so much that I began to feel rather sad for the little girls who would soon be boys. But it turns out there is no Santa, and there was no switchover day. Still not really over that. Each of our childhoods has shaped our reality. What is real becomes, for us, what is normal. My childhood, to me, was completely normal. I had caring parents, annoying siblings, school. I kept to myself. I learnt to be a boy, to do boy stuff like rugby and Boy Scouts and go to an all-boys school and be head boy and, all boy. I'm also autistic. So for me, that was normal too. I doubt that helped. But life was normal because like everyone else actually, I had no baseline to compare it to. I still don't. To me, being trans is normal, and everyone else is bisexual, and you're all just in denial. So my story is about letting each day be my normal, not your normal. I wish I'd known all the labels, but then, of course, we didn't have them. I had no idea those labels existed, let alone applied to me. Labels are curious things. It's almost as if I collect stigma, my designer labels. They are my license to be different, to be difficult, to be all of these things. They are my authentic self. Now, personally, I think authenticity is broadly horseshit. Because it is no more authentic of me to declaim sort of psych ward war stories or discuss the pros and cons of Seroquel than it is when I'm pretending to be interested in where you found the delightful wine that I'm pretending to drink. Or the sports ball. My partner Fee is obsessed with the sports ball. However, I will pretend. And my pretense matters because I have learnt the hard way that people feel far more challenged when my authentic self neglects to make life easy for them. When I cannot ingress their authentic reality. That's when the eyes start to roll. But whoever I am, I came out as this latest me in my mid-30s. And it was very unexpected. It was like, surprise! I felt very lost. I felt very fake. I went to my therapist and she said, this won't solve anything, you know, this won't solve the other problems. And I was like, this is the problem. I need you to untrans me. I am fine. I have children. I had always thought of myself as an ally. And that I'd also felt of myself as too white and too male. These days, the quiet white male is my favourite kind of ally. And that phrase, lived experience, is important because that is not fake. And it is normal. Normal to me as your life is to you. You simply can't make assumptions about what anyone's normal is. No one ought to describe a normal that was never their normal, a life they never lived. No one should speak as if they know my mind. It is a normal they cannot know. Yet they do. Over and over, they give us labels like trans, and yet object when we label them back. Cis is not a slur, it's an antonym. They want to support us, but need us to pay our own way. They like to debate us in the abstract, rather than letting us speak, or speaking to us. We want to tell our own stories. Why events like this are so important. Thank you, Peta. Thank you, Lisa. I thought that discrimination would be visible. A human I could swear at, or a bar fight I might diffuse with quick wit and charm. I honestly used to daydream about abuse I experienced. We do still get shouted at, darling. And I practice my retorts, my bon mots, my esprit d'escalier. But getting beaten up is actually much less interesting. There's normally an embarrassing flurry of squawks and slaps and hair being pulled and then crying and snot. Online is horrendously clean and explicit, and you can revisit it. And it's frustratingly illogical and insane and invisible, and I think actually quite a lot of it unintentional, attritional, yet unassailable. It's like a silent conspiracy. No one knows nothing. You don't notice because there is nothing to notice. The discrimination is in my interest or supportive but concerned. In inclusion speak, I am vulnerable to negative assumptions. On the street, I am mental. I get asked a lot about my support network. No one knows. And I think that's why they call it unconscious bias. The words jar with my life itself, the same kind of reality jarring I get with my autism or depression or simply being female. It is patronizing, it is disingenuous. The actual experience is objective. I'm living it. I can see my salary stagnate. I was removed from my team. My influence base has shifted. I don't know where it's gone. I feel isolated And this kindness is a kindness that has made me sicker and sicker. I'm not hated, just diminished in people's eyes. And I get to watch in slow motion as my capacity reverses until I am basically a child to them. And that's just being female. Meanwhile, as a trans woman, the simplest rights, like being free to exist or to defend our rights, are still not simple, are still not accessible. I mean, all of this is cyclical, of course. In 1902, allowing women to vote was a radical and violently opposed idea in Australia. And amusingly, it was helped by the usual misogynist political machinations backfiring. Politicians are the worst. But that didn't include Indigenous women, of course, or men. Having stolen the land we're on, it's hard not to be conscious of the damage we inflict, the discrimination they face, and even in the suffrage in the mid-60s has done little to right those wrongs. It is a leaking tap of national shame that no one seems to have sufficient desire to address. LGBTQ people would certainly have been disenfranchised if our queerness was written on our skin. But we hid in our white straitjackets and our white cis eggshells. I'm not judging. We fought other battles for the right to raise children or get married or not get sent down for fucking. I'm still not completely convinced the marriage one is a win, except politically, of course. That took a while as well. I mean, after all, there's written evidence that gay marriage happened in ancient Egypt, not on bits of sun-baked clay, but in the Bible and the Sifra. It's Leviticus, if you're really into scripture. Being in the Bible is not the point, though. The point is, it was normal until the Judeo-Christian God Hashem legislated against it, somehow, and then it became abnormal and immoral. Who made that decision? Anyway, 5,000 years later, the Australian Parliament fixed that. Dean Smith, Tim Wilson gave memorable speeches. Penny Wong denounced the vitriolic debate that surrounded that unbelievably unnecessary plebiscite. And George Brandis. I mean, George did wait until the fight was over to share his unequivocal, impassioned support. Like all political ephemera, he said, much fades into history. But people do remember the 1967 referendum, that great act of inclusion of Indigenous Australians, and I predict that, like the 1967 referendum, this decision by the Australian people will come to be seen as one of those occasional shining moments which stand out in our nation's history, about which people will still speak with admiration in decades, indeed in centuries to come. And it is stirring, and it is heartfelt, and it is total bullshit. But you know that. In the real world, the 1967 referendum and the 2017 Marriage Act are shining memorials to Aussie bigotry. They sit comfortably on the national timeline, repression being a national pastime. My trans story is part of that story. It's all the same story, all across the world. It's not Australia. Same horse, different jockey. Here in New South Wales, I had to have a vaginoplasty before I could change my birth certificate. I don't actually know anymore. I think there was one surgeon in Australia that can perform that operation. The out-of-pocket costs come to tens of thousands of dollars. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. It is bullshit. I like to imagine applying equivalent conditions to new drivers. To get your P-plates, you'd need to visit the only car dealership in Australia and buy a $20,000 car, and then you can pay to upgrade to a full license. Seems equally fair. After surgery, 2 more doctors had to examine me. Actually, one of them refused, but signed the piece of paper because they were too embarrassed. And I'm not going to say who it was because they might get into trouble for not actually examining me and agree that, yes, the doc had indeed neutered me, that I was emasculated, evirated, caponized, and, frankly, that I was very happy about it. It was a bit confusing when Jermaine Greer insisted that the procedure didn't make me a woman, because that is exactly what the government told me did make a woman. My operation changed the world for me, but it genuinely did not change anything for the world. It is a barbaric and a very expensive way to get a passport with an F. I'm a child, I'm from the UK, as you can probably tell. not a natural Aussie accent. And I'm a child of Thatcher and a casualty of Section 28. Does everyone know Section 28? Everyone should know Section 28. It's like one of those unthinkable 1960s psychology experiments on kids. Every child in the country took part in this experiment. From 1988, it became illegal in the UK to teach awareness of LGBT in schools. And adults were so scared that children knew far more about Santa than they did about queers. They knew. Everyone was so scared that I was told nothing. I mean, I didn't even know there was a Section 28. Even years later, I didn't know about it. And because of that, because I didn't know that, I didn't know that there was anything I could ask. I didn't know what I was meant to be asking. I didn't know who I was meant to be asking. I didn't know how little I knew. Instead of being educated, I was homeschooled by Ace Ventura, growing up ignorant of myself and utterly illiterate. Section 28 lasted for 25 years. If it had been an experiment, at least we would have data. The deep psychological scars would have borne fruit, however bitter. But it wasn't. So no one gets to learn a fucking thing. This is a battle I will fight all my life. Not the one with the TERFs, not the one with the government. The one with my own deep-rooted disgust and self-loathing. The side salad to my dysphoria. Baroness Knight, who introduced it in 1988, said later that she was thinking of the well-being of the children. I was one of the children, and I'm dying to ask whose well-being she meant. Or if baby transsexuals were simply acceptable collateral damage. Now you must know, of course, that Mark Latham has his own version. A sparkling New South Wales edition of Section 28. It's in committee, and someone with a naughty twinkle made him chair of the Education Committee. So he's shepherding his own bill. It's called the Parental Rights Bill. It's targeted at trans kids rather than the entire LGBTQ community. And actually, because of that, sometimes it feels like we're on our own a little bit. There are not that many of us. We're just in the paper a lot. The kids are certainly alone. It's almost funny that Latham thinks activists are teaching kids to be trans when it's the exact opposite. I am not straight. I am not cisgender. But I had to learn how to be straight until everyone, including me, believed that I was straight. What scares me the most is the sight of people in power who believe that principle, censoring knowledge, provides a better outcome than a full and comprehensive education for all, that keep people stupid is a viable health plan. I suffer from dysphoria, not being trans. This is an illness. Well, there are illnesses. I mean, there are illnesses that attack you, or that corrode you, or even some way you damage yourself, your own mind and body, in order to show that you are sick and suffering. But I can't actually think of any others where the doctors insist the patient suffer the irreversible indignity of puberty before accepting that they know their own mind enough to say that they didn't want that puberty. Or where the government expects you to pay tens of thousands of dollars for major surgery before its judges will judge you or judge your condition authentic. This doesn't happen to other people. Denying that education leads to adults like me, those trans kids will still be trans when they grow up, will spend painful years in the closet. Like me, they will have lifelong mental health problems. Or we could give kids time and space and information, educate them, help their parents, love them, accept, affirm, support the teachers, support the parents, see what happens. Those are the options. You're normal, or their normal. I never knew, and will never know, what it's like to feel comfortable in my gender. I will always be trans. I would trade all my privilege for something most of you don't realise you have.